Kenneth turned 68 on a mild October morning, the kind New York gives as a small apology between the heat of summer and the sharp breath of winter. And he woke to the soft hiss of the radiator and the squeak of the hallway floorboards as Mrs. Romano from 4B carried her potted fern out for a little sun. He lived alone in a small brick walk-up in Woodside, Queens, with a view of the 7 trains sliding past like a silver ribbon every few minutes. And he kept a tidy kitchen with 2 mugs, a dented kettle, and a calendar where he circled bill dates in blue pen. He made oatmeal the way the heart doctor liked him to do, with sliced banana and no sugar. And he set the spoon down exactly on the napkin because starting a day in order helped him feel safe in a city that moved fast. Near 9 o'clock, the buzzer rasped, and he shuffled to the intercom and heard the courier's voice say, "Package." The single word clipped like he had 10 more doors to ring. Kenneth pressed the button, pulled on his cardigan, and met the man at the door. The box was plain and brown, the size of a shoebox, with an extra strip of tape along one edge and a small white envelope stuck to the side. No return address, no cheerful post-it. Just a handwriting he knew as surely as the shape of his own hand. Strong, narrow letters leaning slightly forward, the cross on the T low and long. He had not seen that writing in 3 years, not since the last birthday card, the one that arrived late and said, "Hope it's good," with no dad in front and no name after. He carried the package to the kitchen table, the one near the window that caught a long slice of light in the morning, and he sat down and listened to the radiator breathe while the city murmured through the glass. He opened the envelope first. Inside was a small white card with 2 words in blue ink, "Happy birthday." No exclamation point, no signature. The words looked like they were afraid to say more. He set the card next to the salt shaker and took the pocket knife from the drawer, the one Linda had given him years ago with a little brass plate that read K. And he worked the blade under the tape and lifted the flaps. Inside, cushioned in brown crinkle paper, was a bottle of whiskey so handsome it seemed made for a shelf more than a glass. The label was deep green with gold letters, the neck capped with wax, and the glass heavy at the base the way expensive things are heavy. He held it up to the window and turned it, and the liquid caught the light like it kept a small fire for itself. Whiskey had been his end-of-day habit for decades, not a loud one, just a small glass after a day of climbing ladders or mending railings for neighbors. Back when Linda was alive, and they would sit on the fire escape and watch the street grow soft. After his heart scare 3 years ago, the doctor gave him a list of simple orders: walk, rest, take the pills, and no whiskey. And he had followed them because he liked mornings and he wanted more of them. Ethan had been in the hospital room when the doctor spoke. He had looked at his phone the whole time, thumbs moving, and Kenneth had told himself the boy was distracting himself from worry. Now, he was not so sure. He set the bottle down and looked around the kitchen as if the room might answer a question he had not asked out loud. The kettle ticked as it cooled. A bus sighed on Queens Boulevard. Somewhere below, a radio played a salsa line he knew by heart. He thought of Robert Carson without meaning to. Robert was Ethan's father-in-law, a steady man from Staten Island with a good laugh and a habit of showing up with a tool belt before you even finished saying the word leak. 2 summers ago, a nor'easter took a bite out of Kenneth's gutter, and Robert had been there at 8 the next morning, on a ladder with a hammer, arguing kindly about the best way to anchor the bracket in crumbly brick. Robert liked a small pour of something nice after dinner when the work was done. Not to drink hard, just to mark the day. Kenneth looked at the bottle on the table and felt a simple thought settle. If he could not drink it, the bottle should go to someone who would treat it kindly. He wiped the counter, washed his oatmeal bowl, and put on his jacket. He wrapped the bottle in a dish towel and slipped it into a paper bag, then into his old canvas tote, because New York made you carry things twice. He checked the chain, turned the deadbolt, and paused in the hall to pat the door, a habit he had not explained to anyone. Outside, the block smelled like bakery air and bus exhaust. He walked to the Q32, rode toward the subway with school kids and nurses coming off the night shift, and then took the R to Whitehall Street, where the ferry rolls the big water in a calm way that makes the city seem like a picture you can fold up. On the deck, he stood with the wind on his face and held the tote a little closer when the boat rocked. On Staten Island, he followed Highland Boulevard to Robert's white siding house with the neat porch and the flag that clicked softly on its pole. Robert opened the door in a red flannel and work jeans, saw the bag and lifted his eyebrows. "What's this?" Kenneth held the bottle out. "From Ethan," he said. "He sent it to me for my birthday. I don't drink anymore. I thought you might enjoy it." Robert turned the bottle in his hands and whistled under his breath. "This is something special. You sure?" "I am," Kenneth said. "Make tonight special, and if tonight isn't special enough, make it so." Robert laughed, that low, warm sound that made you feel like you had just done a simple right thing. They stood a minute and spoke of weather, of the ferry being kinder today than last week, of a stubborn door hinge Robert planned to fix before it got cold. Kenneth did not stay. He had never liked to turn a gift into a visit that needed to be measured. He shook Robert's hand and headed back toward the bus stop, feeling light in the way that comes when an object finds its proper home. The afternoon sun laid long stripes across the ferry seats. He watched gulls stitch the air and thought about writing a thank you text to Ethan, then thought better of it. He had written first last time and heard nothing back. At home, the apartment felt like it always did in the late day, quiet, a little proud of its order. He warmed soup and ate it standing by the sink because that made fewer dishes, and he put the bowl in the rack with the one mug and 2 forks. Near 9 o'clock, the landline rang, the old bell sound that always surprised him in a pleasant way. He answered. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice smooth and casual, the way a person sounds when he is standing at a polite distance. "Happy birthday." There was a beat too long between words for them to feel easy. "You got my gift?" "I did," Kenneth said. "What do you think?" Ethan asked. The tone was almost bright, but there was a thin edge in it, like paper about to tear. "It's a nice bottle," Kenneth said. "Did you try it yet?" Ethan asked, and the words landed close like footsteps in a quiet hallway. "No," Kenneth said. "I gave it to your father-in-law. He loves it." The line went very still, not dead, just held like a breath. "You gave it to Robert," Ethan said, voice smaller and flatter. "That's right," Kenneth answered, and he could picture Robert's porch light, the neat steps, the careful way he had turned the bottle to read the gold letters. There was a slow exhale on the line, as if someone had placed a hand on a table and pressed down hard. Then Ethan's voice snapped sharp and hot in a way Kenneth had not heard since the boy was 16 and angry about a curfew. "You did what?" Morning came in soft layers of gray and pale gold, and Kenneth woke before his alarm, the way older men do when the city is still yawning. The radiator sighed. Somewhere below, a delivery truck beeped as it eased into a space and a baker's radio floated up, a Spanish song about luck and love. He made coffee and tried to read the front page, but his eyes kept snagging on the memory of last night. The phone pressed warm to his ear, his son's voice smooth as glass until it cracked with, "You did what?" He rinsed his mug, set it upside down to dry, and told himself that giving a bottle to a good man was not a sin. At 11, the landline rang with that old bell sound that made him think of his first Queens apartment. "Mr. Okello?" a woman said, voice tight and polite. "This is Linda Carson, Robert's wife." He straightened. "Linda, yes. He collapsed this morning," she said, words tripping over each other. "The ambulance took him to Staten Island University Hospital. They're saying heart rhythm, maybe a toxin. He had one small pour last night of that whiskey, and this morning he could barely stand." Kenneth pressed 2 fingers to the counter's cool edge. In his mind, he saw Robert's porch, the red flannel, the careful way his hands had turned the bottle. "I'm coming," he said. He pulled on his jacket, grabbed his canvas tote, and tucked in a cardigan for Linda, because waiting rooms are always colder than they should be, and stopped at Mr. Liao's deli for 2 apples and a packet of plain crackers, something harmless. Outside, Woodside moved in its usual stripes of hurry and kindness. A teenager held the door for an older woman. A man in a Mets cap laughed into his phone. The 7 train sang its thin metal song across the curve. On the ferry, he stood on the deck with the wind lifting his hair, a paper cup of coffee warming his palm, the tote hugged close like a careful secret. The water was chopped but friendly. Gulls rode the air as if they had all the time in the world. In the hospital lobby, the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee hit him at once. A volunteer in a blue vest, her name tag reading Yolanda, pointed him gently to cardiac observation. "Room 12, she said, with that practiced softness people use when they've given bad directions on hard days. Linda rose from a plastic chair when he entered. She looked smaller than he remembered, wrapped in a shawl the color of storm clouds. "He's resting," she whispered, and her eyes glossed with relief and anger in equal parts. Robert lay slightly propped, color washed out, a monitor painting slow hills of green. His mouth was set the way people set their mouths when they mean to get back up. A nurse named Carla from Jamaica by her music-laced accent adjusted a line and said, "Numbers are better now, Mr. Carson. Doctor'll be in soon." When she left, Kenneth offered the cardigan and the apples. They ate a cracker each like it could anchor them. "He had one glass," Linda said. "He admired the bottle for a minute, said it was too nice, and then he poured us a taste with dinner. He said it was the smoothest he'd had." She blinked hard. "This morning he tried to stand and the room went sideways. I thought it was the old pacemaker mischief. Then they said, toxin." Kenneth told her about the birthday, the handwriting, the call, the silence. He did not add any guesses. This was not a day for guessing. The doctor came in with quick, efficient hands and a face that had learned not to frighten people. "We're stabilizing his rhythm," he said. "We've sent blood for toxicology. Did he eat or drink anything unusual?" "A new whiskey," Linda said, glancing at Kenneth. "A gift." The doctor nodded, wrote, and asked Linda to bring any remaining bottle and whatever glasses they'd used, if she could do it safely. "Chain of custody matters," he said, not unkindly. "We'll log it when it arrives." After he left, a soft knock came at the curtain, and Leah stepped in. Ethan's wife, ponytail neat, worry pulled tight around her mouth. "Dad?" she whispered, and her face softened when she saw Robert's eyes flicker open and close again. She hugged Linda, then noticed Kenneth and put a hand to her chest. "Thank you for coming." They moved to the hallway so Robert could rest. The three of them stood by a window that looked at a sliver of gray sky. "He'll be all right," Kenneth said, because saying it out loud could sometimes make a thing lean that way. "I hope so," Leah murmured, then lowered her voice. "Ethan called me last night after he spoke to you. He asked if you'd tried the bottle. He sounded on edge. When I told him Robert had loved it, there was this long pause, and then he said he needed to make a call. I didn't ask who." The words felt like a small weight settling in Kenneth's coat pocket. He tucked them away, to be sorted later with care. "We need to bring the bottle," Linda said, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I don't want the police angry because I touched something wrong." "We'll do it together," Kenneth replied, slow and neat. Leah drove them back to the house, the windshield wipers keeping time with their thoughts. The living room smelled faintly of lemon oil and last night's dinner. On the sideboard, the bottle stood where Robert had placed it, its wax seal neatly cut, the level dipped just so. 2 tumblers sat in the drying rack beside the sink, one with a faint golden ring at the bottom. Linda fetched a clean jam jar. Kenneth rinsed it, dried it, and, using the steadiness he used to save for fine screws and small wires, poured 2 fingers of whiskey into the jar, twisted the lid on tight, and wrote the date on a strip of masking tape. He slipped the tumblers into separate zipper bags and labeled those too. The bottle itself he wrapped in a clean dish towel. "Let's go," he said. Back at the hospital, Yolanda the volunteer treated the bundle like a baby bird and carried it behind the counter to be logged, promising they would note who had handled what and when. "It helps the story make sense later," she said, a sentence that sounded like it belonged to both medicine and mystery. By late afternoon, Robert's color had improved from paper to pale wood. He squeezed Kenneth's forearm the way men do when a hug would cost them too much pride. "You look worse than me," he rasped. "You should see yourself," Kenneth answered, and Linda smiled for the first time all day. When visiting hours ended, Kenneth rode the ferry back to Manhattan in a hush of tired people and sat by the window, watching the statue stand steady as the light slid away. He thought of Ethan at different ages, the boy in a winter hat laughing on a sled, the teenager skimming curfews like a flat stone, the man last night whose silence had felt like a room closing. He stepped off the train in Woodside with his shoulders set and detoured to the dumpster room behind his building to toss the deli bag. He noticed the shoebox from the morning still where he'd left it on the top of the bin. He had saved it in case he needed the return address that never existed. Something in him said, "Look again." He lifted the lid. The brown crinkle paper was as he'd left it, but tucked deep in one corner was a small plastic cylinder with a screw cap, the size of a film canister cut in half. Not a silica packet, not anything he recognized from fancy packaging. Unlabeled. Light powder clung to the inside like breath on glass. He turned it in his fingers and felt a thin shiver of thought. This might matter, and it might be nothing. He wrapped it in a paper towel and slid it into his coat pocket. Upstairs, he laid it on the kitchen windowsill and wrote a small note, "Found in box, 4:55 p.m., and taped the note to the glass. Then he sat at the table, pulled a stack of blank index cards from the drawer, and wrote in neat small letters, "What I know." Under it, he listed the date of the package, the handwriting, the call, Linda's words, the doctor's request, and the existence of the odd vial. He started a second card. Who to call? He wrote two names, Detective, if this became that, and Gary Singh, old army friend, now running tests for animals and sometimes for people who needed quiet results. He looked at the clock. It was not late, but it felt heavy. He dialed Gary anyway. "Ken," Gary said, voice like gravel and warmth. "Been too long." "I might have something that needs a look," Kenneth said. Quietly. "Bring what you can, morning," Gary replied without asking what or why. "We'll start with simple screens." Kenneth hung up, washed his cup, checked the chain on the door, and stood for a moment with his palm on the cool wood. In the hallway, Mrs. Romano's fern rustled as she dragged it back inside for the night. The city murmured, steady and unconcerned. In the kitchen, the little plastic vial sat in the last light, a small question waiting its turn. Kenneth woke before the sun, the way he had since the army, and made tea instead of coffee because his hands felt too jumpy for strong things. The little plastic vial he had found in the shipping box sat on the windowsill with the note he had taped beside it. Found in box, 4:55 p.m. And the sight of those few words calmed him. He put both the vial and the note into a sandwich bag, slid that into his canvas tote, and added his small spiral notebook, a pen, and his reading glasses in their cracked case. He wrote one more line on an index card and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Go slow. Write everything. At 8, he locked his apartment door, tested the knob, and walked to the 7 train. The platform smelled like hot metal and bagels. Commuters stood in soft coats, faces tilted toward the tunnel, breath like plants toward light. He rode to Queensboro Plaza, changed, and got off in Long Island City, where old brick meets shiny glass. Gary's lab was behind a storefront that used to be a tailor. A clean, narrow room with a humming fridge, a small spectrometer on a rolling cart, and a coffee maker that looked older than Kenneth's building. Gary Singh came out wiping his hands on a blue shop towel. He had the same broad shoulders and steady eyes he had in 1989, only now his hair was salt with a stubborn ridge of black. "Ken," he said, and they gripped forearms the way men do when words feel too big. "What have you got?" Kenneth set the bag on the table. "Found this in the box the bottle came in, unlabeled, powder sticking to the inside. The bottle itself went to the hospital for testing last night. I don't want to get in their way. I just need to know if this means what I think it means." Gary put on gloves, opened the bag, and lifted the vial toward the light. "We'll do a quick screen," he said in the calm voice he used when a stray dog was on the table and a kid was watching from the door. "If it's plant, I'll see it. If it's nothing, we'll know that too. Either way, chain of custody." He produced a clipboard, wrote the date and time, Kenneth's name, his own, and had Kenneth sign. "Go get a coffee," he said. "Give me an hour." Kenneth did not want coffee, but he wanted the hour to pass, so he walked to a small diner on Vernon Boulevard, where the counter was clean and the server called everyone Han. He ordered toast and sat at the end with his notebook open. He wrote what he had done. Left at 8:02, arrived 8:36. Gary signed at 8:41. He drew a box and wrote questions on the top line. Under it, why include vial? For shipping? For dosing? Who knew I would give the bottle away? He stopped, underlined that last question, and closed the book because thinking too far ahead made his chest feel tight. He watched a city worker stir sugar into tea with the tired care of a man who had learned to be gentle with small things. At 9:27, his phone buzzed. "Gary." "Come back," he said. "We should talk in person." In the lab, Gary had the spectrometer's small screen tilted toward the light. He did not make a speech. "Ken," he said, "there are markers here for trematol, white snake root compounds. Not dust from the street. Not a random spice. The profile matches an extraction, not wild plant bits. In simple words, this is not packaging powder. This is purpose." The words settled in Kenneth like a stone. He nodded. Could it come from anything else? "There are cousins in the plant world," Gary said, "but the mix points to snake root, and look at the carrier." He tapped a line on the screen. "Ethanol trace and a hint of oak, like someone mixed a concentrate into whiskey so it would not taste wrong. That's careful work." He printed a short report, signed and dated it, and slid it into a clear sleeve. "This is preliminary," he said. "I know the hospital will do their own tests, but you asked me to tell you what I saw. I'm telling you." Kenneth took the paper with both hands. "Thank you," he said, and his voice sounded far away in his own ears. "I'll pay you." Gary shook his head. "You pulled me out of a snowbank on Northern Boulevard with nothing but a toe strap and a prayer. Consider us even for today. But do something for me. Write down where this has been and who has touched it, then call someone with a badge. Quiet is good for tests. It is not good for this kind of truth." Outside, the wind off the river was sharp and clean. Kenneth walked 3 blocks before he trusted his legs enough to sit, then slid onto a bench under a young tree that had not learned how to throw shade yet. He took out his notebook and wrote, 9:47, Gary says trematol. Extract. Purpose. He underlined purpose. He thought of Robert's careful hands turning the bottle on the porch, of Linda's shawl the color of storms, of Leah's voice saying Ethan had asked if he had tried the bottle. He put the notebook away, stood, and took the train back to Queens. In the hallway by his apartment, the air smelled faintly of fried onions and floor polish. He unlocked the door, stepped in, and paused. The room looked the same, but something felt 1 inch to the left, like a picture hung wrong. He crossed to the door and looked at the strike plate. There, where the latch kissed the metal, was a fresh, bright scuff. It could be nothing. Keys make marks. It could be something. A key that was not his. He opened the junk drawer, found a short length of black thread and a strip of clear tape. He laid the thread low across the inside of the door frame, fixed at both ends with tape so a tiny tug would snap it. He did the same at the back door to the fire escape. A small trick from a corporal who got tired of finding his locker tidied by ghosts. He washed his hands, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at his phone. He thought of calling Ethan and hearing the old boy voice and asking simple hard things. He thought of all the ways that could go wrong. He picked up his small digital recorder instead, checked the battery, clicked it on, and put it in his inside jacket pocket. Then he locked up, stepped over the thread, and left for Brooklyn. The Q train carried him past rooftops and water towers. At Kings Highway, he walked a block and stood on the sidewalk across from Ethan's semi-attached house with the trimmed shrubs and the porch light that came on early, even in daylight. He rang. Ethan opened the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his face moving from surprise to something like calculation to a smile that showed teeth but not warmth. "Dad," he said, "this is something." "I need a few minutes," Kenneth said, and stepped inside when Ethan did not say no. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and a new rug. On the counter were 3 bottles lined up like soldiers. None had the deep green label from yesterday. "How's Robert?" Ethan asked. Leaning his hip against the counter like this was a small family visit. "In the hospital," Kenneth said. "They're checking his heart. The doctors think a toxin." Ethan's eyes flicked, then smoothed. "Food poisoning, maybe? He's always eating those deli meats." "He had 1 pour," Kenneth said, "of the whiskey you sent." Ethan rubbed his thumb along the edge of a dish towel that did not need rubbing. "It was just a bottle," he said. "A nice one, for your birthday." The recorder felt like a warm coin against Kenneth's ribs. He kept his voice steady. "Did you tamper with it?" The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Ethan did not speak. The silence grew legs. It walked around the room and tested the chairs. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "You always overthink. You always look for what's wrong instead of what's right." Kenneth nodded once. "And sometimes that keeps people alive." He turned toward the door. "Wait," Ethan said, and there was a new edge in the word. Did he get the first pour? Kenneth stopped. The phrase sat in the air like a dropped coin. Why would that matter? He asked without turning. Another silence. It doesn't, Ethan said quickly. I was just asking. Goodbye, Kenneth said. He walked out, feeling the cheap courage that comes from not raising your voice when you want to. On the sidewalk, he took a breath, pressed the recorder's stop button, and held it in his palm like a small witness. He did not go straight home. He sat in his car at the curb where the shade from a young maple made a pattern on the hood and dialed a number he had looked up on his way over. Detective Reyes, 112th Precinct. A dry voice answered on the second ring. My name is Kenneth Okello, he said, and the words came out clean, because he had practiced saying them without shaking. I believe a family gift was used to harm a man. I have a preliminary lab report from a private lab. I have the packaging from the original box, and I have an audio recording you might want to hear. Reyes did not ask him to explain on the phone. Can you come in this afternoon? He said. Bring what you have. We will log it. We will listen. Yes, Kenneth said. He hung up and looked at his hands on the steering wheel. They looked like his father's hands in old photos. Scarred, patient, good at small, careful work. He drove back to Queens the long way, not because he was hiding, but because he wanted to see the city he loved. Kids with backpacks too big, a woman tying her scarf, a man lifting a small dog into a bicycle basket. As if to remind himself that most things in the world are not poison. In his hallway, the light was the same dusty gold as morning. He unlocked the door and looked down. The black thread lay broken on the floor like a hair. He bent, pinched it between thumb and finger, and did not swear or shout. He looked at the strike plate again, and at the tiny scuff bright as a new coin. Someone had used a key that did not belong to him to open a door that did. He took out an index card and wrote it down. Thread broken, 2:11 p.m. And then he took his tote and his report and his recorder and walked back into the afternoon toward a small office with a window that looked at a brick wall and a man whose coffee mug said, "Do the work." Kenneth arrived at the 112th Precinct with his canvas tote held close and his notes tucked in the inside pocket of his jacket and a calm he made on purpose, the way you smooth a tablecloth before setting down cups. Detective Reyes met him at the front, a medium-height man with careful eyes and a badge clipped plain to his belt, and walked him down a quiet hall to a small office with a window that stared at a brick wall. The room smelled faintly of paper and floor wax. On the desk sat a legal pad, 2 empty evidence bags, and a coffee mug that read, "Do the work." Reyes did not start with big words. He asked for Kenneth's name, his address, his phone, and the simple list of what he had brought. Kenneth took out the clear sleeve with Gary's preliminary report, placed it flat on the desk so the ink would not shine, then set the small digital recorder next to it. The hospital has the bottle and 2 tumblers, he said. My friend Gary has the little vial for now. He did a quick screen. He found tremetol, white snake root, mixed in a way that matches whiskey. Reyes put on blue gloves, slid the report into an evidence bag, and wrote the time across the seal in neat block letters. We will request the hospital's samples and Gary's vial through proper channels, he said. Chain of custody is like a map. If the trail is clean, a jury can follow it. He asked Kenneth to tell the entire story from the buzzer at the door to the broken thread on the floor. Kenneth told it straight and slow. He used exact times from his index cards and did not guess at the parts he could not see. When he mentioned the phrase first pour, Reyes stopped writing and looked up. He used those words? Yes, Kenneth said. He asked if Robert got the first pour. Reyes nodded once and wrote it down exactly, then asked to hear the recording. Kenneth pressed play. The small speaker filled the room with kitchen sounds and 2 men's voices. When the silence came after the question about tampering, it sat in the office the same way it had sat in Ethan's house, like a body in a chair no one had invited. Reyes clicked the recorder off and said, "Thank you. Do not contact him. If he calls, let it go to voicemail. Save every word. We will get the bottle and your friend's vial to the state lab. We will ask the hospital for Robert's toxicology, if Mrs. Carson gives consent." He stood, walked to a copier, and made Kenneth a stamped copy of his own statement. "One more thing," he added quietly. "Change your locks today. Put a simple alarm on your doors if you can. The thread trick is good, but it is not loud. Kenneth took the paper, felt the weight of it, and said he would. On the way out, he paused at the water fountain and took 2 slow sips because his mouth had gone dry. He thanked the desk sergeant with the tidy mustache, stepped into the soft Queen's daylight, and called Linda from the sidewalk. "I spoke to the detective," he said. "They will want the bottle and the glasses formally logged from the hospital. I can come sit with you for a while." "Please," she said, her voice worn but steady. He rode the R to Whitehall, the ferry to St. George, and walked through the lobby that now felt familiar. The soft shoe squeaks, the coffee smell that never quite became coffee, the volunteer with kind eyes who waved him down the hall. Robert was propped higher, a little color back in his cheeks, the monitor making small green hills instead of cliffs. He gave Kenneth's forearm a light squeeze, the quiet hello of men who do not waste a good squeeze. Linda had brought a shawl for herself this time, and a crossword for Robert he pretended to want. A young doctor came in, introduced herself as Dr. Patel, and spoke in careful lines. "His rhythm is stabilizing. We have flagged his blood work for toxins. We will compare with any liquid sample we receive. Did you bring the bottle last night?" Linda nodded. "The front desk logged it," Dr. Patel said. "Good. We will coordinate with the police so the paperwork matches." When she left, Leah appeared in the doorway, hair in a simple band, worry now pressed flat instead of sharp. She hugged her mother and kissed Robert's temple. Then she took a small breath and looked at Kenneth. "Can we talk?" she asked, quiet. They stepped into the family lounge, a rectangle with straight-back chairs and a machine that made coffee that tasted like the idea of coffee. Leah kept her voice low. "I looked at our garage shelves this morning," she said. "There are jars labeled in marker, dry roots, something called tincture. Ethan keeps them on the top shelf behind a toolbox. He's been secretive about that shelf. I thought it was a hobby. I took pictures of the labels. I also found a little notebook with dates and symbols. I didn't have the nerve to open it long." Kenneth felt both relief and sorrow in the same small space in his chest. "A detective will want those photos," he said. "And the notebook, if you can hand it over without trouble. Do not confront him." She nodded. "I already called the number you gave Mom. I left a message for Detective Reyes. I'll bring the laptop too, the old one Ethan used before we married. I never threw it out. It probably still has his searches." "Good," Kenneth said softly. "Let the law carry the heavy things. We just keep them steady." He walked her back to the room. Robert was awake enough to ask for soup. He would not finish. Kenneth stayed until visiting hours, pushed everyone out with polite firmness. On the ferry back, the water looked darker, and the gulls rode low as if they knew a storm was sitting somewhere out past the Verrazano. He stood on deck and let the wind clean his thoughts, then went home with a short list in his pocket. Locks, alarms, shades. At the hardware store on Queens Boulevard, he bought 2 new deadbolts, a bundle of stick-on door alarms that promised to shriek like banshees, and a screwdriver with a better grip for old hands. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes and a haircut that fought his cowlick and lost, bagged the items and said, "Cold snap coming." "I'm getting ahead of it," Kenneth answered, and meant the weather and not the weather. In the apartment, he laid the tools on the table like instruments before a small operation, and worked slow. He removed the old faceplates, set the new bolts, drove each screw home with the patient push of a man who had fixed more than he had broken. He stuck an alarm on the front door and one on the back. He opened and closed each once to hear the thin scream and smiled despite himself because it was ugly and it worked. He made tea and wrote the day's timeline in his notebook from first step into the precinct to last screw seated. He was still writing when the phone buzzed on the hall table. Unknown number. He let it ring twice and slide to voicemail because he could hear Reyes' voice in his head. "Do not engage." The message icon blinked. He pressed play on speaker and stood still. "Dad," Ethan said, voice too calm, like a sheet pulled too tight. "We should talk. You went to the police. That was not smart. We could have handled this." The call ended without a goodbye. Kenneth wrote the time and the words exactly, printed them in his neat block letters, and slipped the card into the fireproof box beside the deed, Linda's ring, and the hospital receipt copy. The apartment hummed with small sounds. The radiator's sigh, the fridge's soft motor, the hallway lift groaning as someone in 3C went up. He checked the new bolts, set the alarms, and turned the chain. When he was sure of the doors, he pulled the shade on the kitchen window and stood with the kettle while it warmed. The shriek hit without warning. The back door alarm screamed, then cut off as if a fingertip had found its switch. Kenneth moved to the wall beside the window, not in front of it. He pulled the curtain back the width of a finger. The fire escape was empty. The screen door moved once in a slow breath and settled. He waited a full minute, then opened the door a crack and looked down. A single sheet of paper was tucked between the frame and the jamb. He eased it free. Thick black marker, a single line in an angry hand. "Stop letting them in, or I will." He did not swear. He took a picture with his old phone, slid the paper into a gallon zipper bag, sealed it, and set it flat on the table. Then he called 911 and said his name and his address, and that he had a threatening note. The dispatcher stayed calm and said an officer would come. Officer Patel, young face but careful steps, arrived in 10 minutes, photographed the door, the hinge, the spot on the floor where the note had rested, bagged the paper, and left him a small card with a case number and a space where the time was already written. When the door closed and the elevator groaned again, Kenneth washed his cup, wiped the counter, even though it was already clean, and sat. He could feel fear like a small animal moving around in his chest, but he also felt something steady set its feet. He wrote one last line on an index card and put it on top of the others. Locks changed. Alarms set. Note received. Police called. He turned off the light, sat in the chair by the window where he could see both doors, and let the city's low music carry him through the first long watch of a very careful night. Kenneth woke in the chair by the window with the first gray of morning lifting the edges of Queens, the radiator ticking like a soft metronome, and the cheap door alarms still armed and quiet. And he spent a moment listening to the building's small music, the elevator's sleepy groan, Mrs. Romano's fern brushing the hall as she dragged it toward the light, a distant kettle taking its time. Before he stood, stretched the ache from his back, and wrote a line on an index card. Awake 6:12, alarm steady. He made tea and a slice of toast, put both on a saucer as if setting a place for calm, and checked the thread he had taped low across the inside of the back door. It was unbroken, a thin promise that no one had walked through in the night. At 7:43, his phone rang with the crispness of purpose. "Judge signed," Detective Reyes said, voice even. "We're serving the warrant now. Please stay home. If your son contacts you, let it go to voicemail and save it. If anyone knocks, verify first. We'll update." Kenneth said he understood, wrote the time and the words exactly, and placed the card face up beside the kettle like a small flag that marked where the day had begun to turn. He fought the old habit to go and see for himself, to stand on a far corner and watch the lights, and instead he set himself small tasks that felt like steadying a table. He tightened the wobble on the kitchen chair, wiped the inside of the cutlery drawer, sorted the rubber bands that had grown into a tangle. Outside, Queens went about being Queens. Buses sighed, the 7 sang its thin metal song. A child laughed on the stairs, the way only a child who trusts the next step will be there can laugh. At 10:31, a text from Leah lit the phone. "They're here. I'm in the bedroom with the door shut. Boots in the garage. Boxes moving." Kenneth replied with 2 words, "Stay safe," and then did not touch the phone again, so he would not watch it in the way that makes time crawl. He poured fresh tea, wrote the time, and put on his cardigan because the day had cooled in that shy way October days do, when the sun seems polite. At 12:04, he heard the soft slap of something landing on his doormat. The alarms had not screamed. He moved to the window and looked down the hallway from the slit in the curtain. No one lingered, only the long runner and a rectangle of brighter light by the stairwell. He waited 1 full minute, then opened the door with the chain still set. A padded envelope lay there, brown, unmarked. He slid it in with 2 fingers, set it on the table, took a photograph of it on his phone for time and shape, then eased the flap with his pocket knife. Inside was a single glossy print from a phone camera. His own door at night from across the hall, the peephole's faint glow like an eye, The hallway empty. The frame held a touch crooked, as if someone had taken the shot fast and pressed send without checking. There was no note, no signature, just the suggestion of watchfulness. He slipped the photo into a plastic sleeve, noted the time, and called Reyes. "Don't throw it out," Reyes said. "We'll send someone to log it." 10 minutes later, Officer Patel was on the threshold again, careful as before, photographing the envelope, the hallway, the door frame. "City's full of cameras," Patel said gently, like a person offering a good thought instead of hope. "We'll ask the building for your floor's feed." When the officer left, Kenneth made another cup of tea he did not drink, because the work of making it kept his hands busy, and he waited with the calm shape of patience that soldiers and old men learn to wear. At 2:04, Reyes called back, and the room seemed to lean toward the voice. "We found 3 mason jars on the top shelf in the garage," he said. "Masking tape labels, WSR, root tox, and tincture. 2 hold dried plant material that looks a lot like white snake root. 1 holds liquid. We also found a small notebook with dates and symbols, triangle marks, asterisks, initials that appear to correspond to people. There's an entry with RC and a triangle next to a date from last month. There's another with KO and a number that worries my lab people." Kenneth sat down without meaning to. "My initials," he said softly. "We'll send photos once they're logged," Reyes continued. "We also found an unsealed envelope addressed to you. The front says Kenneth in your son's hand. Inside, there's a short line. You'll understand why when it's over, and a crude drawing of a tree with its roots circled. We're bagging it. Leah has consented to turn over an old laptop and shared devices, and she's provided screenshots of search terms, extractions, masking bitter taste in whiskey, toxicity in adults over 60. Your son wasn't at the residence. We've put out a locate. Please keep your doors locked." "I will," Kenneth said, and he meant both the doors and the shape of his voice. After the call, he washed the cup he had not used and set it upside down to dry. He took out the fireproof box, opened it like a book he had been writing in longhand, and slid in a new card. 2:04 p.m. Jars, notebook, envelope, initials. He added the photograph of the door and wrote in the corner, "Delivered without knock." He stood by the back door and looked at the thread, still intact, and then at the cheap alarm's square plastic face, ugly and loyal. The city slid into late afternoon, that hour when the light goes thin and the air turns metallic, and the hall smelled faintly of someone's onions. He thought of Robert's porch, and the way a man like Robert measures a day by the jobs he finishes. He thought of Linda's storm-colored shawl, and the exact way she had said toxin. He thought of Leah in her ponytail, quiet and straight-backed, handing over a laptop because truth is heavier than fear if you carry it properly. He wrote another list. What I can do. Under it, he put small things, check locks, keep notes, answer only to law, rest, and he did those in order. Around 4:30, a car idled outside long enough that he looked through the curtain again. It moved on. A child cried somewhere, and then stopped with the quickness of a problem solved by a snack. At 5, the landline rang once and cut, then voicemail blinked. He let it sit a minute, then pressed play. "Dad," Ethan said, voice quieter than before, the kind of low you use in a hallway when you do not want the walls to know. "They're making a mistake. Those jars are not what they think. Call me. We can handle this without strangers." Kenneth pressed stop, wrote the time and words neatly, and slid the card under the clip in his box. He did not call back. The kettle clicked. He made soup and ate it at the counter with the window cracked to let out steam, the October air biting just enough to feel like honesty. When the light gave up the last of itself and the apartment turned to lamps, his phone buzzed with a text from Reyes. "We're filing a locate now. If he comes by, call 911. Do not open. I'll try to get a tech to install a proper camera tomorrow." Kenneth typed, "Thank you," and set the phone face down, not as a refusal of the world, but as a way to let it be quiet. He checked the thread one more time, turned the deadbolts he had installed with his own patient hands, and sat in the chair by the window where he could see both doors. The city hummed its evening hymn, sirens far off, a couple arguing, and then laughing under their breath, the distant whistle of a kettle that belonged to someone he would never meet. And he let those sounds braid into something that felt like a blanket. He looked at the small evidence of his careful day, The bagged photo, the index cards, the sticky notes with times, and understood that cozy is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of order you make on purpose. He breathed with the radiator, slow and steady, and told himself, as if telling a friend, that the next right thing was to wait, to let the truth he had handed off find its feet in rooms with brick wall windows and mugs that say, "Do the work," and that he would be here, ready, if the knock came. Kenneth woke to a cold, clean morning, the kind that makes queens look sharper at the edges. The radiator gave a soft hiss. He lay still a moment and listened for the cheap door alarms. Silent. Good. He checked the front bolt, the back bolt, and the thin black thread he had taped low across the inside of the back door. Still intact. He put water on for tea, set an index card and pen beside the kettle, and wrote his first line of the day. Awake, 6:28, doors secure. He sliced a banana over oatmeal and ate slowly at the small table by the window, watching the 7 train glide like a silver ribbon across the gap between buildings. At 8:12, the phone rang. "Reyes," the voice said. "State Lab ran a rush. Their prelim matches your friend's screen. Trematol, white snake root, present in the liquid from the hospital. We're opening a formal case. Today I'll need a recorded statement from you, start to finish. Also, a tech can come by to install a simple camera system this afternoon. You okay with that?" Kenneth said yes to both. He wrote the time and words exactly on his card, then pulled on his sweater and did the 3 small things that steadied him before hard days. He washed the mug until it squeaked, set the kitchen chair feet level under the table, and folded a spare cardigan into his canvas tote for a hospital visit. By 9:30, he was on the ferry, his paper cup of tea warming his palms as gulls stitched the air. In Robert's room, the light was softer than yesterday. Robert's color was better. The monitor drew steady green hills instead of cliffs. "You look more like yourself," Kenneth said. Robert squeezed his forearm in answer. Linda, wrapped in her storm-colored shawl, had a crossword open but not filled. Leah arrived a few minutes later, hair tied back, tired but steady. "I dropped the old laptop at the precinct," she said, voice low. "I also emailed screenshots to Detective Reyes, Ethan's searches about extraction, dosage, and how to hide bitter taste in whiskey. I forwarded last night's text too. He wrote, 'If anything happens, it's on him,' meaning you." Kenneth nodded once and felt the words settle like a small stone, filed under things to keep. "Thank you," he said. "Let the detective carry it now." When Robert dozed, they spoke about ordinary things, the Staten Island wind, the ferry snack vendor who never smiles, Linda's plan to make soup at home and bring it in a thermos. Ordinary talk has a way of keeping fear in its chair. At 11:40, Kenneth said his goodbyes and rode the ferry back, the sky bright but cold, the city stacked like cardboard cutouts in clean light. He stopped at the hardware store on Queens Boulevard for 2 longer screws for the strike plates, because longer metal bites deeper into old wood. The clerk recognized him from yesterday. "Doors holding?" he asked. "Better every hour," Kenneth said. Back in the apartment, he ate a sandwich standing at the counter, rinsed the plate, and wrote another line on the card. Home 1237, lunch, waiting on tech. At 1:10, the building's super, Mr. Alvarez, knocked and let a young NYPD tech in with a neat black case. The man moved gently through the rooms the way careful people do in other people's homes. He mounted a small camera above the front door inside, another watching the back door and fire escape, and a third in the narrow hall so it could see both directions. "Motion alerts to your phone," he said, connecting the app and showing Kenneth how to mute the sound at night. "All footage saves to the cloud and to this card here." He pointed to a tiny door on the device. "If someone pulls the plug, we still have it." Kenneth thanked him and wrote down the model numbers on a fresh card because details are a kind of comfort. At 2:05, Reyes called again. "We've got a locate out. If he shows at your door, call 911. Do not open. I'll text you when we have movement." Kenneth answered, "Understood," and added it to his notes. He made more tea he did not drink and sat at the table without touching the phone, letting the apartment's small music hold him. The radiator's sigh, the elevator's groan, the upstairs neighbor's careful footsteps. At 3:18, the phone buzzed with a short text from Reyes. "We have him. Brought in without incident. I'll want your recorded statement at 5 if you're able." Relief did not come like a flood. It came like a deep breath that finally made it to the bottom of his lungs. He wrote the time and the words on a new card, tucked it under the clip in the fireproof box, and put on his jacket. By 4:45, he was at the precinct, the small office with the brick wall window and the mug that said, "Do the work." Reyes set a recorder on the desk, clicked it on, and spoke the case number in a steady voice. He asked Kenneth to start at the buzzer on his birthday and tell it all, forward and plain. Kenneth did. He used his index cards for times, spoke the exact words he remembered. "You did what?" and "first pour," and the threats tucked under doors, and he did not add guesses. When he finished, the room felt wider. Reyes clicked off the recorder and gave him water in a paper cup. "He asked for a lawyer," Reyes said. "That's his right. We'll book him on attempted murder, possession of a controlled toxic substance, and tampering. The DA will call you soon with next steps." He hesitated, then added, "You did everything right, Mr. Okello. Keep doing it." Outside, the air bit like a coin. Kenneth walked to the bus stop and watched the sky go from pale to steel. On the ride home, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. When he reached his kitchen table, he pressed play on speaker and stood with a pen ready. A man's voice, careful and dry. "Mr. Okello, this is Daniel Caldwell, counsel for your son. I'm reaching out to advise you that we intend to show the bottle was purchased without his knowledge of any contamination. We believe this matter can be resolved without a public trial that would be painful for all involved. If you wish to discuss, my office number is..." Kenneth pressed stop and wrote the time and the words exactly. He did not call back. He sat a while with his hands on the table to stop them from doing anything they should not. A few minutes later, a different call came. "Mr. Okello? This is Miss Chen, Victim Services with the DA. I'm calling to explain process and answer questions." Her voice was warm without being soft. She told him about arraignment, about how the judge decides bail, about how discovery works, about how his index cards were better than most people's memories. "If defense contacts you," she said, "you don't have to speak with them. You can route everything through us." He thanked her and wrote her name and number on an index card he labeled "Help." Evening settled. He heated a pot of soup and ate it with a heel of bread and butter. The camera over the door blinked once to say it was recording the near dark. At 7:22, the phone buzzed with a text from Leah. "He's in custody," they told me. "Thank you for standing firm." Dad's sitting up, complaining about the soup. "That's my father." Kenneth smiled for the first time that day. He typed back, "Good men complain when they mean to live a long time. Rest." Later, Robert called from the hospital, his voice rough but steady. "I heard about the arrest," he said. "You did right." Kenneth told him about the camera, the longer screws, the index cards. Robert chuckled once. "Trust a handyman to fix a crime with a screwdriver and paper." At 9:05, the hallway camera chimed. Motion. Kenneth glanced at the phone screen and saw only Mr. Alvarez's broom crossing the frame and the tail of a mop bucket. He let his shoulders drop. He checked the thread by the back door, still in place, and the cheap alarm still armed. He washed his bowl, dried it, and placed it on the rack at a neat angle because small lines make bigger lines easier to hold. He opened the fireproof box and read the cards from the last 2 days in order, like a chapter written line by line. On the top card, he added one more sentence. 8:12 a.m., State Lab. 3:18, arrest without incident. Statement given, calls logged. He closed the box, set it on the shelf, and turned out the kitchen light. Before bed, he stood at the window and looked down at Queens Boulevard. Buses sighed. A cyclist's light blinked red like a heartbeat. From a distant open window, someone's saxophone practiced scales, slow and patient. He rested his palm on the door, like always, and said quietly, "We keep the order. They chase the truth." He lay down at last with the city's hum in his ears, the cameras watching kindly, and the door alarms ready to be loud if they had to. In the cozy pocket he had made on purpose, clean counters, recorded words, teacups stacked, he let sleep come step by careful step. The days moved in clean steps after the arrest, and Kenneth kept them on index cards so his head would not have to carry all the weight. First came arraignment. He sat on a wooden bench in a bright courtroom and watched Ethan stand in front of the judge in a plain sweater and tired eyes. The clerk read the charges in a calm voice. The ADA spoke about risk and evidence. Caldwell, the silver-haired lawyer, asked for release. The judge read the report from the state lab and the notes about the jars and the text about the first pour, and she set bail high with strict terms. Ethan looked straight ahead and did not turn to find his father. After that came meetings. Miss Chen from Victim Services walked Kenneth through what would happen next. She spoke simply about discovery, hearings, and dates. Reyes called to say the lab had finished full tests on the seized liquid and that the results matched the whiskey from the hospital. Leah came to the precinct with a small cardboard box. Inside were the old laptop, a phone she had replaced 2 years ago, and printed screenshots. The tech from the DA's office thanked her and signed a receipt. Kenneth stood to one side and watched her hands shake and then go still. They did not speak about family. They spoke about labels and timestamps because clear facts were the best kindness they had. A week later, the evidentiary hearing began. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and polish. The judge wore glasses low on her nose and listened more than she spoke. The ADA started with chain of custody. Reyes took the stand first. He told the story as a list that made sense. The bottle logged at the hospital, the lab request to the state, the search warrant for the garage, the jars labeled WSR, root tox, and tincture, the notebook with initials and symbols, the text messages pulled from backups and carrier records, the words about the first pour. Caldwell stood and pushed at each part. He asked about the hospital desk and whether a volunteer had touched the bottle before it was bagged. Reyes said yes, and then said how they remedied it with clean logging. He asked if the labels could be hobby names. Reyes said the lab would speak. He asked if RC could be someone else. Reyes said the dates matched the day Robert fell ill. The judge took notes without showing what she thought. Then the toxicologist from the state lab testified. She explained white snake root in simple language. She spoke about trematol and how it moves in the body. She said the liquid from the mason jar, the seized jar labeled tincture, and the residue in the open bottle from Ethan's home all showed the same pattern, like 3 parts of one recipe. She did not use big numbers unless she had to. Caldwell tried to say the whiskey might have been tainted before purchase. She answered that the residue in the open home bottle matched the seized herbal extract and that the sealed bottle from Ethan's shelf showed no such residue. The judge sustained 2 small objections from each side and then let her finish. Robert took the stand next. He wore a clean shirt and held his cane like a promise. He told the jury about the night he opened the gift, how he admired the bottle for a minute because it looked too nice to drink, how he poured a small glass for himself and a taste for Linda, how the flavor was smooth with a faint bitter he had not noticed before, how he went to bed and woke feeling like the room had tipped. He said he thought it was his heart, then learned it was something poured into his heart. He did not speak in anger. He spoke in plain words. Caldwell asked if he had mixed his pills with alcohol. Robert said he had taken the same pills for 10 years, and nothing like this had happened before. A juror in the front row wrote that down. Leah testified after lunch. She looked small on the stand, but her voice held. She showed the photos of the garage shelf. She described how Ethan had joined online groups about herbal extraction and how he had moved the jars to a higher shelf and asked her not to dust there. She said she had seen the notebook on the workbench, that it had dates and symbols and a few initials, and that she had closed it because she did not want to snoop. But after the hospital, she had told the police where to find it. Caldwell kept his tone smooth, but tried to suggest a grudge. "You're protecting your father," he said. "Yes," she answered, "and myself." The judge did not look up, but Kenneth saw 2 jurors glance at each other and then back at Leah. When it was Kenneth's turn, he sat straight and folded his hands to stop them from making shapes in the air. The ADA led him through each day in order. He told about the buzzer on his birthday, the plain box with the small white envelope, the 2 words in blue ink, "Happy Birthday," and the handwriting he knew. He told about choosing to give the bottle to Robert because of his heart, and because a good bottle should be used by someone who still could. He told about Ethan's call and the question, "Did you try it yet?" He repeated his answer and the sudden shout, "You did what?" He spoke about the hospital room and the soft machines, about Gary's test and the weight of the word purpose, about the broken thread on his door, the note shoved under the screen, The padded envelope with the photo of his own door at night, the new locks, the cheap alarms, and the small camera that clicked once to say it had eyes. He kept it simple. He did not say what he felt most of the time. He said what he did. Caldwell's cross was careful and sharp. He held up a neat report from a private handwriting analyst and said the note on the box was likely not Ethan's. He spoke about old arguments and distant dinners missed and the sale of property that had hurt feelings. The ADA objected to the last point. The judge sustained and told Caldwell to move on. Caldwell asked if Kenneth was sure he had not poured himself a drop to smell, to remember. "I did not," Kenneth said. His voice did not shake. "I quit 3 years ago and I like mornings." Caldwell pressed a little more, then sat down. That evening, before the trial proper, Caldwell called Kenneth's phone. Kenneth let it ring to voicemail. He listened at his table with a pen ready. "Mr. Okello," the lawyer said, "there is a way through this without a show. My client is prepared to accept responsibility for carelessness. No attempted murder, no long trial. Think of your family." Kenneth wrote the time and the sentence, and then called Miss Chen. She said he did not have to answer any of that. He thanked her and put the card away. He worried through the night like a man smooths a stone in his palm on a long walk. In the morning, he made tea and stacked his cards in order. Then he went back to court because a person must show up for the truth even when it hurts. Opening statements came clean and different. The ADA stood and told the jury this case was about trust and a bottle, about a man who knew his father's heart and used that knowledge to measure harm. Caldwell told the jury this case was about hurt feelings, assumptions, and accidents that looked bad on paper. He spoke the words reasonable doubt like they were the only words left in the language. The ADA called witnesses again, shorter now, because the judge had ruled much of the evidence in. Reyes read a single text out loud. Make sure he gets it all in the first pour. Won't take much with his heart. The courtroom held its breath for a second. Kenneth felt the breath return to his chest in a long path. He looked at the floor, then at the judge, and then down again. He knew better than to find Ethan's face. The lawyers rested sooner than he expected. The judge gave the jury careful instructions. They went out with their notes and their quiet faces. The clock on the wall ticked. Reyes sat next to Kenneth in the hallway on a hard bench and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. Robert dozed in a chair, his cane across his knees, and Linda worked at a crossword she did not finish. Kenneth thought about how tea helps when there is nothing to do but wait. He thought about the door alarms and the camera that watched while he was away. He thought about the index cards in his box and the straight lines they made together. The bailiff called them back. The room filled with shoe sounds and a rustle of coats. The jurors filed in. The foreman stood. He held a small folded paper. He did not look at Ethan. He looked at the judge and spoke in a clear voice that did not shake. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The word landed like a heavy book set on a table. It did not shout. It did not ring. It simply arrived and did not move. Kenneth let out a breath he did not know he had been holding since the day a plain brown box whispered at his door. The judge thanked the jury and set a date for sentencing. Caldwell put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan stared at a point just above the judge's head. Kenneth did not go to him. He stood beside Reyes and Linda and Robert and felt something steady take root where fear had lived. On the sidewalk after, the air felt sharper. Buses sighed. A woman laughed into her phone. Queens went on. Kenneth walked to the stop and waited for the bus with his hands still, his notes in his pocket, and the next small step clear in his mind. Go home, lock the door, make tea, and write the time on a card so the day would know where it stood. Sentencing came 2 weeks after the verdict, on a cold, bright morning that made Queens look newly washed, and Kenneth rode the 7 train with his index cards in his pocket and his hands quiet in his lap, then took the subway downtown to the courthouse, where the halls smelled like paper and floor wax, and the benches felt harder than he remembered. The judge read steadily from the bench, her voice clean and even. And when she said, 25 years in state prison, 15 before parole, the words did not crash, they settled. And Ethan did not turn to look at his father, only kept his eyes fixed on a point past the flag as deputies led him away. Miss Chen, from Victim Services, spoke to Kenneth in the hallway, gentle and practical, and helped him fill out a form that asked, in plain boxes, whether he wanted notice of transfers and hearings later. And he said yes, because order was how he slept now. Outside, the air bit his cheeks and buses sighed, and a woman laughed into her phone. And Kenneth stood a minute with his coat open to the sun, then went home the long way so he could pass the bakery on Roosevelt and get a warm roll he did not need. But that told his body the day could be simple again. Back in the apartment, he checked both bolts, looked at the thin black thread he had left taped across the back door frame out of habit, and finally peeled it away because the cameras watched now, and he wanted to stop talking to the past with strings. Then he put the kettle on and wrote one line on an index card in neat letters. Sentencing 10:22 a.m., home safe tea. The days after slid into a rhythm he built on purpose. Morning tea, short walks, small repairs, notes written and put into the fireproof box. While Robert came home from the hospital with a cane and a joke. Soup's bad unless it's served in a hospital. And Linda brought him to the ferry pier twice a week so he could watch gulls ride the wind and complain about the cold like a man who planned to be around for many more winters. Leah changed the locks at her place and left the porch light on less often. And when she came to Queens, she hugged Kenneth like family and left a small bag of mandarins on his counter, the kind with skins that peel easily. And they did not speak much about Ethan because some words only make rooms colder. But they spoke about work and bus delays and the slow joy of a plant that blooms when you forget to watch it. Gary stopped by one afternoon with a brown envelope and a thermos that smelled faintly of cardamom, and inside the envelope was a clean copy of his lab notes with his signature and date and a short line he had written just for his friend. "You did the hard right thing," which Kenneth slid under the clip in the box between first pour and locks changed, because he liked to see the hard and the right share a line. Detective Reyes came on a Saturday with fishing poles still in his trunk and stood on the fire escape with Kenneth to look at the slice of Queens Boulevard below. And he gave one more piece to the story in his dry, simple way. The lab had traced the extraction method to an online guide and a local landscaping cousin who had shared plant material. And while that cousin would face charges, the choices that mattered had been Ethan's. And hearing that did not change the weight, but it made the map of the case neater in Kenneth's head. As November thinned to December, the city put lights in its windows, and the 7 train hummed in the dark like a metal lullaby. And Kenneth took the ferry now and then, not to go anywhere, just to stand at the rail with a paper cup warming his hands and let the water put the weeks in order. The way moving things sometimes steady you better than still ones. One night, he took the padded envelope with the photo of his door and the 2 notes. The angry one that said, "Stop letting them in or I will," and the old white card that said "Happy Birthday" in blue ink. And he put them in a manila sleeve marked evidence. Returned. And then he slid that into the fireproof box, shut the lid, and set the box back on the shelf, because he had decided he did not need to look at them to remember what they meant. The small cameras kept watch, a quiet blink in the corner, and sometimes they caught Mr. Alvarez pushing his mop or Mrs. Romano carrying her fern to the stairwell for light. And once they recorded a stray cat pausing at the open hallway window to stare in like a tiny guard. And Kenneth saved that clip because it made him smile. On a clean, bright morning after a light snow, he took a screwdriver and 2 long screws and tightened the last noisy hinge in the kitchen. And when the hinge stopped complaining, he felt something in his chest stop complaining too. In January, the DA called to tell him an appeal would be filed, because appeals are part of the map, and Miss Chen reminded him the long road was not his to pave, only to walk when asked. And he wrote both sentences on a card, and then made tea and watched steam lift from the cup, and thought how some troubles pass the way steam does, up and away if you let them. When he could not sleep, he read the cards from the beginning out loud, like a small book with short chapters. And when he reached the last card, he wrote a new last line that was not a date, only a sentence that felt honest. "I am safe tonight, and the door is mine." One Sunday, he met Robert and Linda at the Staten Island boardwalk. and they leaned on the railing in their coats, arguing softly about which pizza place still made a proper slice. And Kenneth thought this was what the end of a mystery looks like. Not fireworks, not headlines, only three people who had almost been broken standing in wind and sunlight, talking about crust. Later, he walked home from the bus stop in Woodside with a bag of oranges. And the street smelled like laundry heat and garlic, and a kid dragged a rolling suitcase that was louder than it needed to be, and he loved the sound for its ordinary rattle. At his door, he rested his palm on the wood like always, and said a small sentence to the room before he turned the key. "We keep the quiet we make." Then he went in, set water on to boil, and opened his window just enough to let in the thin city cold. Night came early as it does in winter, but it came kindly to him now. And when the kettle clicked, he poured, added a slice of lemon, and sat at his table looking at the neat stack of index cards beside the fireproof box and the small camera's single soft blink. And in that simple circle, hot cup, safe room, clean notes, he felt the story settle into its final shape. Not a wound, but a seam, visible and strong, the kind a careful hand leaves after mending something worth keeping.